And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for tomorrow morning, or by tomorrow morning, a lot of IFR from Bristol Bay across southern Alaska, in along the north coast of the Panhandle, and into Lincoln Island Glacier Bay, and staying mostly VFR up to the north there, and then marginal VFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast, and pretty much marginal VFR from the Bering Strait southward here to the Pribilofs to about Atka Island, and either side of that, a pretty good zone of VFR over the Bering Sea. For the afternoon, IFR here, plume of it from just west of Nunivak Island down across St. Paul and St. George into the eastern Aleutians, VFR to the west, and then marginal VFR to the west and northwest of that zone. And IFR now up into the southern slopes of the western Brooks Range there across the Yukon Flats, right on down along the Yukon River into the Kuskokwim Valley, Bristol Bay, and most of Cook Inlet, most of south central Alaska VFR, Susitna Valley, and eastward in the Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, Northern Panhandle, all IFR, and marginal VFR for the remainder of the southeast coast. And for the morning hours, IFR along the coast of the Panhandle there up into the eastern North Gulf Coast and westward to roughly Portage or Whittier, either side there, kind of that's the cutoff point. Marginal VFR becomes VFR here for south central Alaska, especially the west-southwest interior, all the way up to the North Slope, IFR for the eastern North Slope Arctic coast. And still some IFR here around St. Lawrence Island, but improving here over the eastern Bering Sea with some pretty good VFR showing up, especially along the Aleutians into the Alaska Peninsula. Then IFR there on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula here, right up to about Cape Newenham, marginal VFR, eastern Bering Sea, up to the Bering Strait, and out to the west, not too bad, just a small swath of marginal VFR there around Adak. And mostly IFR here from the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, right on down into the Copper River Basin, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, especially the Manuska Valley IFR, and all the way into the northern Panhandle. Taking a look at passes for Brooks Range, not too bad tomorrow, VFR for both Anaktuvik and Adigan. Otherwise, Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR, rainy IFR, windy IFR, and Isabel looking IFR, as well as Mentasta and Tanita. Again, a lot of IFR coming into southern Alaska. Portage IFR, Chilkoot and White IFR. Freezing levels here. Warmer air coming northward with that southerly flow and all the moisture. So 2,000 to 4,000 feet now by tomorrow morning, up to the 2,000 feet up to the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula area, but still west of the Panhandle and well south of the Aleutians. And as far as icing goes, weak front bringing a narrow band of considerable moderate rime icing into the western Aleutians there, but not making it quite to Kiska Island by the afternoon hours. And then some moderate rime icing here along the Yukon River Valley, right on down in maybe the northern Kuskokwim Valley. Another zone of considerable moderate rime icing here for the northern Panhandle. And the eastern North Gulf Coast, the cutoff there right around Cordova. And the jet stream here, pretty big trough here, or narrow trough from the Arctic coast right on down into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. And to the east of that trough, we've got southwest flow up to 115 knots right across the southeast interior. And to the west, northerly flow, 70 knots from the Chukchi Sea all the way down into the eastern Aleutians and to the south. And for 9,000 feet, broad area of northerly winds continue here for the central eastern Bering Sea, 40 to 45 knots, right on down across the eastern Aleutians, becoming west-southwest 40 knots to 60 knots there, but that's southwest of the western Aleutians. Southwest, 75 knots into the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Basin, southeast interior areas. And at 3,000 feet, 60-knot winds here aimed at the northern Panhandle for tomorrow, just off the coast there, northeast, up to 70 knots for the western Brooks Range, turning northerly at about 50 knots there as it blows across the southwest coast, then diminishing to 35 knots down toward the eastern Aleutians. And turbulence Quite an area of considerable moderate turbulence here, pretty likely for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, to Kodiak Island, most of south central Alaska, Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast, and a fair portion of the Panhandle. Another zone up here in the central interior and from the western Brooks Range all the way down into the Kuskokwim Delta.